Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. We'll let people start joining us. And then we'll start here in a minute. All right, folks, we're going to just give it one more minute. We recently switched to using Zoom webinar instead of our GoToWebinar, so I think people are just getting used to that. So I'm going to wait one more minute and then we'll go ahead and start. And we look forward to having you all here. Okay, I think I'll get started. Hi, welcome everybody. I'm Kathy Madison. I'm with Comtech Services and CIDM. On the Comtech side, I'm a consultant and also do a lot of marketing for Comtech. And on the CIDM side, I also do marketing, but I'm also the CIDM member liaison. And if you're new to Comtech or CIDM, you may not know that we are one and the same. We're the same company. CIDM, of course, is our organization that puts on industry webinars like this one, but we also put on conferences, and we have a membership organization, and the members have ways to network with each other, including doing monthly roundtable discussions and getting a newsletter, and they also have their own CIDM workspace, Slack workspace. So it's a great opportunity for you to network with other information developers. And of course, on the Comtech side of things, that's the founding company, and that's our consulting arm. And on that side, we do all sorts of consulting, all things related to information, content development. So we do information modeling, taxonomies. We help you with your minimalism skills. And of course, we do a lot with DITA rollouts as well. And we also do style sheets and Schematron, which is the subject of today's webinar. So that's a little bit about us. Just give you a couple more introduction slides before I turn it over to Octavia. As I said, we do training. We have lots of training coming up in the new year. We've got something new that we're doing. We're hosting classes in Asia time zone. So folks in India and Eastern European, it's a little bit easier for them to attend our sessions. So we have those going on. And then we also are doing one that's a little bit more prime time for the Europe market, as well as the standard North America time zones. So we look forward to you checking out all of these workshops. And we have publishing, which isn't quite, it looks like we don't have our class that we normally teach. Oh yes, we do. Optimizing the DITA authoring experience. That is the workshop that does talk about schematrons and also constraints and many other things. So if you're liking what Octavia is talking about today, you may want to tap into that a workshop that starts in March. On the conference side, CIDM is proud to announce that we are going to do another Convex, which is our content experience. It's a virtual experience. We did it last year because we couldn't host conferences live face-to-face, and we are going to do it again in spring, back to our normal time that we do the DITA North America and Journeys Conference. We're going to go back to that time period in April. And unfortunately, we don't think we can meet live yet in April, so we are going to go ahead and do another Convex. It is going to span time zones like we did last time. So the early morning sessions here in North America are going to be perfect for the folks in Europe and Asia, and then we'll keep going into the day. So it will be long days, but you don't obviously need to attend the whole thing. And if you're interested in speaking, whether you're in a European time zone or an Asian time zone or a North American, we've got that call for speakers open now, and it will close on January 15th. So get that in, over the holidays, maybe when it's quiet, your companies are shut down. That gives you plenty of time to submit your talk. And of course, if your talk is accepted, you get a free registration. So that's the big conference we're going to be doing in 2021. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce today's speaker. We're pleased to have Octavian here from Synchrosoft. Most of you better know them as Oxygen, the creators of the Oxygen XML editor. And Octavian is a software architect by trade, and he's also a project manager. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to him. And as we do that, I'll remind you of the logistics. We are going to record this session. And if you have any questions for the speaker, please use the Q&A box that you have there, and I will field those questions at the end. Octavian's talk is about 45 minutes to an hour, and he'll be taking questions after that. He's allocated the whole hour and a half, so if you can stay, he will continue to field those questions. So again, please use the Q&A. I will monitor the chat as well, but ideally you can use the Q&A, and that way we won't have two things that I have to look at. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and Octavia, you can take over.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Do you hear me well?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Octavian Nadolu, and today we'll talk about business rules and how you can create business rules for DITA projects. Before we start, let me tell you a few things about me. So I'm a software architect. I'm also a project manager at Synchrosoft, the company that develops Oxygen XML editor. I have more than 15 years experience with XML technologies and schemas and schematrons and so on. I'm also a contributor to various XML projects and co-editor together with Nico Kucherauer of the Schematron QuickFix specification that we'll discuss later in this presentation. Here's the agenda of the presentation. So we'll discuss about business rules and how you can implement business rules using Schematron, how you can apply them on DITA documents and on an entire project, and how you can define quick fix action to correct the problems reported by Schematron. So what are business rules? The definition of the business rule, it's a rule that defines a constraint and resolve to true or false. So it's a rule that either it's true or false, and it assesses the business structure. It checks the document and controls the behavior of your project, and it helps you to achieve your goals. So this is how a business rule is defined. For Schematron, you can define business rules such as, for example, you want to have all the titles with uppercase, let's say something like this, uppercase on each of the words from the title. So this can be a business rule, and you can apply it on your project and make sure that all your documents are respecting this rule. Then you can have another one that says that you don't want to exceed 50 characters in the short description. So you want to keep the short description short in your documents, right? And there are other rules that you can add to other business rules that you can add to a DITA project, such as elements being empty, or list items, or list that contains only one list item, or code blocks. And we'll discuss about these rules later. Schematron, it's a language that allows you to make assertions in documents. And this goes to the business rules definition. So it allows you to create assertions that are also resolved to true or false. So either the rule is respected or not. And it applies on XML documents, but it can be used also for Markdown or for JSON documents if you want. The Schematron is an ISO standard, and this is good because it's respected and it's adopted by hundreds of projects in the past decade. And it is important that when you develop these rules, you can use these rules also in other applications that implements this standard. Here's a little bit about the Schematron history. So it was invented by Rick Jelife, and it started in 1999. Then there were some important releases, 1.3 in 2000 and 1.5 in 2001. And starting with 2006, it became an ISO Schematron standard. And there were some minor changes in 2010 and 2016. Why Schematron and you do not use other schema languages? So you can use also XSD, RelaxNG, or DTD schemas, but these are more, with this you can add more rules for structural aspects. You can define the structure of your documents and the data types. But with Schematron, you can create your own rule, custom rules, and with your specific messages for your project. And why it's important to use Schematron as a schema to check your documents is because you can check also interdependencies. So you can check, for example, if the project start date it's smaller than the project end date, or different values from your documents. And you can check data cardinality, or you can perform also algorithmic checks using XSLT or programming language. So you can extend the Schematron language and perform also very complex checks. Schematron is used in a lot of domains, and we get a lot of feedback from different companies, financial, insurance, government, or technical publishing. And they use Schematron to check their data and make sure that the data is as they want. For example, if you are in the financial or insurance, you want to make sure that your data from the documents are correct, and you want to check them and make sure that they're not there's not something wrong there. Or in the government where you have very precise documents and you want to fill them, and there is a standard there. Or in technical publishing, where you want to have the published content of your documents being in a format, and the data that is there, it's as you want it. Schematron is also very simple. There are only 5 basic elements that you can use to create a rule. There is the assert and the report that allows you to define the test. Then there is the rule element that allows you to define the context for which element you want to apply the test. Then there is the pattern element that allows you to group multiple rules, similar rules, but you can also use for abstract patterns. We'll discuss also this later. And there is the schema that is the root of the document. On assert, it is used to test a definition or a rule that you define. And it's something like this: you assert that the price is greater than 10, and this rule is triggered when the assert goes to false. So if the price is not greater than 10, then this message will be displayed to the user. So an assert generates a message when a test evaluates to false. So if it's not true, then the message will be displayed. Then a report generates a message when the statement evaluates to true in this case. So it's the reverse of the assert. So you report a problem when the price is greater than 1,000. This is how you read this rule. And the message, the book price is too big, will be triggered if the price is greater than 10. So it depends on the rule that you want to write. You can use either the assert or the report. Then you have the rule element that allows you to define the context. In my case, it's a book. So I want to check the book price. So I define a context, which is the book, and then the asserts and the report are grouped inside the rule and are referring to the book price. Then the pattern that can group multiple rules that are related somehow. But as I said, can be used also to define abstract patterns that we'll discuss later. And then you have also the root, the schema, which is the top element. And what is important to have this namespace on the root. This defines that this document, that is an XML document, represents a schematron. So this is the namespace of the schematron. So now we have a schematron created. Let's see some example of rules and how you can create them for DITA now. One example is if you have semicolon after each list item. So I don't want to have in my documents a bunch of semicolon after each list item. Either you remove this or maybe replace it with a full stop. So let's see how we can create this type of rule and how it can be used. So I switch to the application. I've created here a project with some rules that you can check. And this is one of them. Let's switch to auto mode. This is one of the documents. It contains a simple list with some list items. And I want to create a rule that will check if for each list item I have a semicolon at the end and present me an error. So I'll create a schematron here, very easy. I'll say new file, schematron. I'll set a name, let's say my rules, and hit create, and have the schematron. Then here I'll insert a pattern, and in the pattern I'll insert a rule. The context of the rule will be a list item because I want to check the list item content, and I'll use a report, and I want to report a problem when the list item ends with semicolon. So I'll use ends with function, use the content of the list item and ends with semicolon, and I'll type also a message, list item should not end with semicolon. Okay, I'll save this. And then I can apply these rules on my file. I'll just associate this file that I've created with my document, and the rule is applied, and we see that I have some red highlights here, and I have the message that I typed there displayed. So now to solve this problem, I either delete this semicolon or I'll replace it with a full stop if I want to add something at the end. Another example would be to avoid scale. So if you are using the scaling attribute on a DITA image, then it's possible that your image to not be scaled properly when it's published in PDF or other formats. So maybe it's better to use a scaling tool and scale the image scale the image as you want, and make sure that the image looks better scaled with that tool. So you can add a check that verifies this scaling attribute that should not be added on a DITA image. Let's see how we can do this. So I have here another example. This is with the scaling, and I have here an image, and if I see the attribute, it has a scaling to set to 200. I can also show the attribute something like this. And it has an image with an href and also scaling set to 200. So I'll add a new rule here. I'll add it in the same pattern, say Schematron rule. The context now will be the image, and the rule will be also a report. So I want to report the problem when the scale attribute is found in the image. And I'll type a message also, avoid scale in image. Let's say something like this. Okay, and then if I go back to my document, I will associate again the rule also with this document, and we see that the message is displayed here. So I have an error that says to avoid the scale attribute, and I can double click here to edit the attributes and remove the scaling attribute from the image, and everything is okay. And now I'm sure that my document will look like this when it will be in output. And if I want to have a bigger image, then I can use an image tool to do this. Another example would be if you have consecutive lists, for example, and you split it by mistake. So it's possible sometimes to split a list by mistake, and we see that we have an extra space here between these two list items, and it's hard to determine this this split of a list. And you can check this using a rule and make sure that you either merge this in one list or maybe added an explanation before this the second list. And the same thing is for order list. So here we have to order list. It's easier to spot the problem, but also here it's a problem and you need to add something maybe before the second list. And I'll show you an example also for this. But this time I want to do something more. So we have this this list here with the splitted list here, and we want to check this problem because it's a more complex rule. I already created it. I created a set of advanced rules that are applying on my project, and these are here in the rule advanced, and I will set up these rules for my entire project. So for this, I'll go to options, preferences, then I'll go here in the document type association, and I want to add a new rule for all my documents, for all my DITA documents. So I'll type here new rule. I'll set a name, let's say for the scenario, my rules. And then for the file type, I need to be an XML document. And I use a custom schema, which is the one that I've created earlier. And I use also a variable here, project directory URL. So you can share this project with someone and they have the same rule there. And I use this as default scenario. So I use the DITA scenario with the DTDs and so on, but I want to have also my custom rules for my project. Then I hit OK. I save this, and the rules are applied automatically on my file. And you see that I have here a warning that says something like, okay, there are two consecutive lists. Probably you split it by mistake, and you can choose to merge them if you want. So I can choose to merge these two lists together. Then there is another example here for ordered list. So I have the same problem here. There are two lists that are splitted, but this time I choose, for example, to add here a, a description. I don't know, a second list, something like this. If I type correctly. Okay, so now the problem is gone. So you either add something between the two lists, or you merge them. Otherwise, I think it should be reported as a problem. Another example, if you have, for example, a list with only one list item. So why should have only one list item in the list? You either convert it to a paragraph or you add a new list item. Otherwise, it's no sense to have only one list item. And we have an example also for this one. So I have here a list with only one list item, and it pop-ups me an error, and I can choose to add a new item here, and then the error will be gone, and the file will be valid. And for this, in order to implement this rule, you can set the rule context to an order list or to order list if you want, and then you can count the number of list item and assert that the number of list item is greater than 1. And when this is false, a message will be triggered. Then another example would be if you have styling in titles. So usually you don't want to have styling in titles, italics or bold and so on. You want maybe to have just PH to add some information there, but you want to have all the titles styled in the same way. So you can add a rule that checks if styling are presented in added in the titles to show you a warning. And I have an example also for this. So I have here a bold added for this title, and I can add also a new one here, let's say an italic, and it presents me two errors here. So you can choose to unwrap this. So it says that only PH are allowed in titles. And to implement this rule, it should be something like this. So you check the elements from the title, and if the name is different from PH, then report a problem. So you can use this report, and if the name of the elements from the title are different from PH, you report a problem. So you've seen how to create rules for DITA projects, and let's see now how you can integrate this rule in a development process and validate your content. So in order to check the documents, you can associate Schematron directly with each file using a processing instruction model, something like this, and specify the href and the type of the schema and the namespace here. Or you can use tool-specific options. You can associate it with all the project files. You can associate it with specific files. And this depends on the application that you are using and the support that the application provides. I will show you some examples here. So in the first two cases, when we created the rules, we associated the rule directly in the file using these actions from here, associate schema, and this added the processing instruction in the file. But if you do this, the rule will apply only on this file, so will not be applied on each file. If you want to apply it on all the documents, then you can use validation scenarios in Oxygen, for example, and you can create, as I did here, a scenario for the DITA document type that will be applied on all your documents. Or you can use also this validate action, validate and check for completeness from here. I'll not save the file. And here you have also an additional check that you can use, for example, with the rules, and check the rules directly from the project. And there are also other cases of associating rules directly on a folder if you want, using the validate action from here, and you can configure some scenarios on this folder, and all the files from this folder will be validated accordingly with the validation scenario that you define. So this is a way. Another way to run Schematron validation is using xproc or Apache Ant, and maybe use the default Schematron implementation that is available on the Schematron GitHub page. And I will show you some example also for this type of validation. So let's switch back to the application. I'll close these files. We don't need them. Okay. And I have here an example with xproc. So here it's an xproc that verifies this simple XML document, dog.xml, and I'll open it. It has only one element here, dog element, and then this runs validate with Schematron, and the Schematron document is this one, this dog Schematron. And if we check the Schematron file, we see that we have a rule that set the context on the dog and then checks if the dog has a bone element inside. So if I run this xproc, this will report, this will create a result in this results SVRL file, which is a Schematron validation report language. So Schematron has also a report language that allows you to generate in a specific format the report. Let's run this. You can run this also from the command line. So this generates this SVRL file here. I'll format it. And we see that it has a lot of information, but our interest is this failed assert. So we have here a failed assert that says the test was bone and the location was in the dog element, and this is the message of the assert. And if I correct my document, let's say I add here a bone and save, then I run again the xproc, I'll get the result, refresh it. And this time the fired rule was not triggered, and everything was okay with my message. Another way to run a Schematron validation is using Ant build. So I have here an Ant that uses a Schematron advanced. It's a bigger Schematron here with a lot of rules that I added. And this checks a simple DITA document that is this one here, and uses the default XSL implementation of the Schematron. So this is the implementation that is available on the Schematron GitHub page, and you can download it from there. So it applies some style sheets on the Schematron, and then this the result style sheet is applied on the XML document, and in the final step generates an SVRL result. But I added a new step here. I added also an SVRL to HTML. So from the SVRL document, I created a small HTML with only with the failed assertions and reports. Let's see how this runs. So I'll not save the files. So I run this build. As I said, you can run this also from the command line. It's you just type the build name, file name. So this generates here in the distribution folder this instance SVRL that has a lot of rules, because I had a lot of rules in my document. And I generated also an HTML file from that SVRL that has only the failed assertion and reports. And this contains the type of error, the message, the location where the error occurs. And of course, you can create a more nicer HTML. This is what I created. I've seen better ones with the messages grouped by category, and of course, the images, colors, and so on. But I just want to show you that it's possible to create a nice HTML report also from this SVR language that the default Schematron implementation provides. Then let's discuss about the Schematron validation result. So there are different type of problems that you can check with Schematron or define in Schematron. You can say that the problem is a bug or it's a vulnerability, or you can set different severities. You can say that it's a fatal error, or it's just a simple error, or it's a warning, or you want to say that it's just an information. You don't want to scare the user, you just want to point some hints to him. So the message severity in Schematron can be set using the role attribute that can be set on the assert or report element. So in the assert or report, you can set this role attribute as I did here in this small example. And this will generate a warning or an information problem in the application. And as we've seen in Oxygen, we present this as highlights, but also on the range ruler, and there are also images depending on the role of or depending on the severity of the problem displayed in the results. I'll show you. I have here a small example that has a lot of problems, and if I check it, we see that we have all these problems displayed here. You have also on the range ruler, you have images depending on the type of error that is presented. Then you can also export this and send it to someone if you want to, I don't know, get feedback on the errors, or you can, for example, in the application here, you can say you want to save the result as HTML, and I can set result here .html, set a name, and then save it there, and you'll have a result something like this. Then you have this SVRL, which is also a standard language, is the Schematron Validation Report language. As you've seen, this is an XML, and it has the information about the test that it checks, and the role and the severity of the problem, the location. And of course, from this HTML, you can create also a nice HTML report to provide to someone. Something like this, like I did in my example. And if you want to integrate with, to have it on an integration server, this Schematron checks, you can have, for example, a process that sends each time the user commits something on a repository or makes modification, send a report, an HTML report with all the problems that are in that project. So you can also integrate it with such servers like Jenkins or Travis. We done a lot of things with these integration servers. So you can run this Schematron also on a server if you want. Then the Schematron rules can be also auto-generated. And you can have, for example, a style guide. Some companies have a style guide about how to write the documentation and what are the constraints of the documentation. And from this type of style guide, you can also auto-generate some rules in Schematron and apply it on your documents. And I'll show you some example here. So there is an intelligent integrated style guide created. It's available on GitHub, and it's an implementation. It's a sample implementation of a style guide that you can develop if you want, and that provides support also to generate the Schematron rules and apply the Schematron rules on your project automatically. So if we go here on this page, this project is created by my colleague George Bina, and there are also other colleagues that are contributors. And here you have a lot of information about how to use this style guide, and how you can create your own style guide. You can fork this, and There is also a sample file here that you can test. I'll use this sample file. And there are some validation problems that are displayed here. This is the Oxygen web author, and it says something like, okay, the title should be no more than 55 characters, but otherwise will be truncated, or here it's something about the description. And you can also see more details. So this style guide is also published on the web. It's on the GitHub now, and it has the rules written here. So it's a style guide written in DITA and then published in this web help format. And there are rules related to images, rules related to lists, and so on. So there are some sample lists, sample rules here. And you can also edit this style guide. As I said, this is the source is a DITA image, and the rules in the style guide are added something like this. So you have a description of the rule that you want to have, and then you have also a table with some information about the rule. So the title should be between 10 and 55 characters, and you can also you can change these rules very easily here. But you can also add new rules in your style guide. Say, okay, I want to add a new paragraph here, and in the paragraph I can add a new rule. And I have a library of rules from which I can choose. These are provided in the project. So this says something like avoid word in element, or avoid end fragment, or restrict the number of words. So you can choose these rules, which are generic rules, and you can specify, for example, for avoid word in element, you can specify the parameters, what element, let's say you want to avoid in the title the word oxygen, something like this, and the message, avoid oxy. And when you save this, this will automatically trigger a build that is made on Jenkins, and this build will republish the documentation, the style guide, but also will create the rules, the Schematron rules based on this information from your style guide. I'll not publish it right now because it will take some time, but you can try it if you want. This style guide, you can check it also locally, and I've have here um, a clone of the style guide locally. And if you open the project, you have the same support here to edit the rules directly from Oxygen, and I can add a similar rule here. Let's say I want to create a new section here. I can add a title. I select the rule, avoid word in element, add parameters, type the title, and then the words, let's say oxygen again, and the message, avoid oxygen in title, something like this. Then I will save it, and I have also a sample file here that contains an oxygen, and we see that we do not have yet an error displayed here. But if I compile my style guide just by running a transformation defined in the project here, and that generates the rules as Schematron rules here in this document, then when I validate the document or I make a modification, it pop-ups the error and it says avoid oxygen in title, and it provides also some actions to remove the word and so on. So you can use also this type of style guide, and this is based on some library of rules that we provide in that project. So rules like avoid word in element, but you do not specify the word and the element. The user must choose what word in what element, or limit the number of characters and specify the number of characters that you want to avoid, or avoid duplicate content. These are generic rules that can be developed also in other projects and then reused and implemented as you want. So the user can use these rules that are implemented basically with abstract patterns. So this is the why the patterns, the abstract patterns are very powerful, because allows you to define generic rules for Schematron, and the user can just choose some of the parameters and implement the concrete Schematron rules. So the user can choose which of the rules he wants to use in its document, and then hit generate and generates the concrete Schematron rules. I have also a small example with an abstract pattern here. And this says the limit number of words, and you see that I have a variable for the parent element here, and also for the maximum words, for the minimum words, and for the message that is provided to the user. And this abstract pattern has an ID and also has this attribute set to abstract true. And in order to implement this, the parameter should be provided. So what happens in our implementation of intelligent style guide is that the parameters that are set in the style guide are passed to these abstract patterns, and the concrete implementation of the Schematron is created. So I have here two implementations, one that says the short description and set the value 1, the minimum words 1 and the maximum 50, and one for the title when the minimum words it's 1 and the maximum is 8. So you can have different implementation and use the same abstract pattern. Then let's discuss about Schematron QuickFixes. So Schematron quick fixes are intended to help the user to solve the problems reported. And it's similar to spell check. So if you have spell checking problems, the spell checker will help you to correct those problems very easily just by choosing one or the correct answer. And you can choose from the answer that the spell check provides. And in a company, you can have different type of users. For example, you can have a content writer, which is an expert and knows very well the content. For example, you have an automotive company, and he knows very well the content and what to write there in the documentation, but it's not an XML expert. And if a problems occurs in the document and the errors is provided, then he needs to ask an XML expert to solve it. And the XML expert will not know the content, so they need to discuss together and solve the problem. So a way to avoid this overhead is to create some actions for the content writers of the XML expert, create some actions that will help the content writer to solve the problem easier without breaking the document, and making sure that the document is correct at the end. Why this Schematron QuickFix? The Schematron QuickFix language is an extension of the ISO Schematron standard, and it helps you to define this type of actions very easily directly in the Schematron document. And this is an example here. So on the assertor report, you can set this SQFix attribute, and then define the actions that will be provided for this problem. And this will be presented to the user when the problem is reported in the document. The Schematron QuickFix specification is available on GitHub. It's developed within the W3C community group, and now it's the second draft of the specification. You can check the specification on this link. There are also some examples on the Schematron QuickFix GitHub page. Let's see some use cases where you can use Schematron quick fixes. So let's say you have some sections and you want to generate IDs for each of the section. So you can provide some actions to the user that will say add the ID to the current section and generate an ID in a specific format. For example, use the title of the section. And you can also provide actions that will generate IDs to all the sections from the document. So this will help the user to create the content more easily and to generate these IDs, and it's easier for him to make sure that are correctly written. So let me show you an example for this. I'll switch back to my project. Close this one. And I have a lot of files here, so I'll close also these files. So we have here an example with some sections does not have IDs, and I'll show you also the tags. So each section should have an ID, and we see that we have an error here, but if I want to type the ID manually, it will be harder for me. So if I use this action, add ID to the current section, it will be easier because it will use the current title, and this is good for me because I will keep the same structure for all the IDs. And even if the IDs, the title is missing, for example, I could decide that in my document, I want to generate, for example, an ID, a random ID, something like this. So this is depending on the implementation that you want to use. And also you can choose to add IDs to all the sections from the document. And this also helps the user because doesn't need to go to each section and add IDs. Another example is when you want to tag something and you want to make sure that some information from your document is tagged in a way or another. Here is an example with a link. So if you have links in your documentation, they should be X links, otherwise they will not be clickable, and the link will be just in the documentation without any help. You need to copy and paste it somewhere to access it. So let me show you an example for this also. Choose. So I have here some text, and we see that I have some link, and it detects automatically that this is a link in the document, and it converts it to an xref. And I'll show you also the full tags. So it has the xref, but also the format, the scope. So it helps me a lot to create content here with just a simple click. And then each time I add, for example, here some new content, let's say a new link, and I type HTTP, I don't know, oxygenxml.com, it will pop up this error, and it'll say that this link should be converted to a next link, and it will create this automatically for me. So this is another example where a Schematron QuickFix can help you to correct the content and make sure that the content that it's created, it's corrected, it's correct in your document. Another example would be if you have a broken table. This is a more complex example. So if you have missing cells in the table and you need to fix this table layout, it's hard for me to do this. There are some missing cells, this with gray here, and to add each cell, it's not easy. So I can provide an action that will say, okay, add all the missing cells from the table. And I'll show you an example also for this. So I have here this example with missing cells, and it pop-ups me an error, but it also helps me to correct the table layout and add the missing cells. And now I can just add the information here. And another interesting example would be if you want to ignore some rules. So maybe at some point you decide that some of the rules that are presented are not for you, or maybe you want to ignore it in some context, and you can create some actions also to ignore the rules, the Schematron rules. And I've created an example here for the sections. So I do this. So for these sections, uh, I provide some actions to add the rules, but also you can uh, add some actions that will say ignore the rule in my document, and automatically all the rules are ignored. And this basically adds a suppress a processing instruction in the document with a suppress check for this type of problem. So as a conclusion, each project can have its business rules, its own business rules, and these business rules can be created using Schematron. Schematron it's made for this purpose, and goes to this definition of the business rule. You can also define these SQF actions to correct the rules, the reported rules, and it helps you if you don't want to make mistakes, and it helps also the user to speed up the work. And you can also auto-generate rules. If you have a library of rules, for example, as I showed in the project that it's available on GitHub, you can also start from that project and develop your own library of rules, and then apply it on your projects. Added also here some resources to the Schematron official site, and the Schematron specification, and the QuickFix specification, some intelligence style guide. There are also some example of Schematron rules that I added recently in our user guide to help the user to implement them. There are different use cases here, um, with broken links and with duplicate IDs and so on. So, and I want to add more rules here with examples from our user. As we get more examples, we will add it here, and there are some of them with quick fixes and so on. So you can also check these rules if you want to learn more. So thank you very much for your attention, and maybe we can take some questions if there are questions.
Great, thank you so much. A reminder, there is that Q&A dialog box, and you could ask your questions there, or you could put them in the chat, but prefer you use the Q&A. I just wanted to say thank you, as always. You folks from Oxygen and Synchrosoft always provide amazing examples and a lot of technical details. We really appreciate that. There is a question
Thank you.
that's related to CSS. So can you apply CSS to a Schematron rule in the Oxygen editor so that when you have a problem, it really jumps out to the writer? I mean, you were showing those pop-ups, but is there other things you could do so it really jumps out?
I don't understand exactly. So um, it's I don't get exactly the question. So
So it was an anonymous person. So that anonymous person, if you want to add a little bit more description, so
so
Tavia,
can you apply CSS to a schematron rule? The CSS is applied to the XML, to the DITA document.
right?
The schematron rules are applied over the document. So I don't know what what is the how you want to have this CSS and schematron together.
Yeah, I guess, and then they're going on to say something more prominent than the squiggly red line.
Oh, I understand now. So yeah, this depends on the on the application. In our case, we cannot use CSS to change this line from here and use different rendering, for example, for the error. So in Oxygen, you cannot do this. The only way is to have this warning here, like a line. You can change the color, of course, of the line from preferences, but we do not have support to have a different rendering, maybe I don't know, square or something different. So if this is the question, yes, you cannot have a different rendering. This is the default rendering that we provide for any type of error, not necessarily schematron. But you cannot change. You can change only the color. You cannot change the rendering.
Okay. I thought there would be tons of questions for you, but people are being a little shy, or maybe you answered them all. I don't know. So here's, whenever I say that, then more questions come in.
Okay.
So keep them coming, you guys. We do have, 30 minutes that we could pick his brain about your questions. So what if we have at the same element a spell check error, a schematron, and a DTD error?
Yeah. Both all of them will be rendered. There is a priority between the errors in Oxygen, so there is a priority of the highlights, but uh, I don't know if I can make a spell check error here. Something like this. So in the spell check, for example, in the author, the spell check is presented here and the error here. If you have another error over this DTD error, let's say, then it will have a higher priority because it will be from DTD and will present it over. But if you hover over the problem, here will present all the problems from this location, all DTDs. Maybe you have multiple schematron problems presented in the same location, and then on the tooltip you can see all of these problems, and of course you can see them in the results. But if you want to spot it when you edit, you'll see only one, and then you need to go and hover over the problem and see if there are more than one here.
Okay. All right. There is a question about licensing. Is the schematron included with the editor, or is it an add-on?
The Schematron is included with Oxygen, so the support is available right now. You just need to associate the schematron with the document, and the schematron is available also in the web author. So you can also use you can test the web author also with schematron. And if you have, for example, a project, you can use both in the standalone version and also in the online version with the same set of rules. And of course, you can use it also on a server with the same set of rules if you, or in other applications that are using Schematron.
Okay, that's good news. What skills are required to develop schematron rules? What's your advice there on what someone should know before they start?
I made some tutorials about Schematron. I think they are available on our website. Uh, Schematron, as you've seen, is not very complicated. So if you new these five elements, you can write a schematron. You've seen that it's simple. But if you want to make more complex schematron, then you need to learn more. And the powerful part of the schematron is that you can use XPath. So in order to create these rules and make the checks, you need to learn XPath and learn how to create XPath expression, learn how to develop more complex with functions and so on, XPath functions. I think if I open one of the schematron here, you see that there are a lot of XPath expression that are used here. So the elements are similar, but to define, you need to know the function that can be used. Oxygen provides content completion, and you can read about each function that you can use, and you have documentation and links to the W3C specification or Saxonica to read more about these functions. So basically, you need to know these elements, and Oxygen helps you to create this, and then you need to learn a little bit of XPath and then start to write schematron rules. Of course, if you want to make more complex rules, then you can add also XSLT. But if you are a beginner, I think this is the best way to do it. Start with some schematron rules and learn some XPath.
Yes, and obviously, Oxygen has some resources on their website. If you're a CIDM member, there have been a couple articles posted in the Best Practices newsletter, which is for members only, on the subject. Scott Hudson has done a couple from his talks at conferences. And then, of course, as I mentioned in the beginning, and maybe you guys weren't all here, Brianna Stevens teaches a class on optimizing the authoring environment, and Schematron is a big part of that as well. All right, so you talked about the Schematron being part of the web version and then the Oxygen version. Does it work in the text mode also?
Yes, the schematron rules can be applied also in the text mode. It's the same implementation also here. So if I go in the text mode with these rules, you get the same problems reported. And you can say, okay, add the ID for the current section or add IDs for all sections. So the schematron is available in both text and author mode.
Right. This comes from Magna. Can you do a conversion with Schematron? For example, when having an element with metric values, can you add in parentheses the US value calculated?
Of course, you can create such such conversions in Schematron. You can create also actions to correct the problem using the Schematron QuickFix and convert the values correctly.
Okay. All right, this one I bet you a lot of people may want to do. If they already have a bunch of Schematron scripts that they're using in the batch mode, is it easy for them to tuck them into the Oxygen in order to have them applied during the editing? Or are there limitations on Schematron rules that are unusable in the Oxygen authoring environment?
No, basically, if the schematron is valid, if it's a valid schematron and you can open it in Oxygen and validate very easily here, if you are using something like this, a schematron, and you validate it, then you can apply it on your editing environment, and you can do what I did earlier in the presentation. So you just need to go to the preferences and associate the schematron with your documents. In my case, with DITA, but you can also use, for example, we have schematrons for XSL documents. So if you go to the XSL framework here, there are also a set of schematron rules with best practices or with documentation for XSL. So you can associate for any type of document. And you just need to create a validation scenario or associate it in the editor, depending on your project.
Okay. I don't know that there's any more questions. And like I said, whenever I say that, a couple more come in. But we did get a comment that said to explicitly thank you. Great job. And of course, then one did come in.
Thank you.
The presentation is very clear, and the resources you guys have made available is getting better all the time. Thank you very much, and have a nice holiday. That comes from Raymond. You know, Raymond Bissett. I can never say his last name, but I think you know Raymond, or the team does.
Thank you very much for.
Yeah. And Mark is also saying thanks for a lot for sharing. So again, as always, you guys never disappoint us with your webinars and your openness to share your knowledge. We really appreciate it. And remind everybody we did record this, so you will get a link to the recording afterwards. And with that, I'll just ask, we'll pause just one more time and see if there's any last minute questions or comments coming in. Here's another great comment. I don't know Schematron yet, but I'm already started loving it. Thanks.
This is good. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of great positives. Here's another one. Thanks for the excellent and informative presentation, and just in general, thank you. So I think we've got all the questions asked, and you've got some folks excited. So I think that's always a good thing.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us.
Yes. All right, everybody, have a great holiday season. Happy New Year. We didn't announce any webinars. Normally we tell you all our upcoming, but we don't have anything scheduled yet, but we'll get those once the new year has started. And we look forward to seeing everybody. And of course, the Oxygen team will be at Convex. We just got their commitment earlier this week, so I'm sure they'll be submitting some talks and be participating in that event as well. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.